chair was cold, hard, and Daniel had been sitting in it for 40 minutes, watching the woman he loved walk down the aisle toward another man. She looked beautiful. Of course she did. Her dress was white and fitted, her hair pinned up the way she always wore it on special occasions, the way she used to wear it when she dressed up for him. The flowers in her hands were red roses. She had always said red roses were too cliché. He remembered laughing about that 2 years ago on their first Valentine's Day. And yet there she was, holding red roses, smiling, and none of it was for him. Daniel sat in the front row. Her side of the family had insisted he be given a seat of honor, because to everyone in that church, he was still her closest friend. That was the story she had told. That after 2 years together, they had simply grown apart, remained close, and moved on. Clean, civilized, no mess. He clapped when the officiant said they could kiss. He smiled when her mother cried. He laughed softly at the groom's toast. And the entire time, tucked into the chest pocket of his jacket, his phone held 6 months of screenshots that could have burned the whole room down. He didn't use them. Not yet. Daniel and Judith had met at a work conference in Atlanta. He had been presenting a client pitch, 6 months of research compressed into 14 slides, and he had been proud of them. She had been in the audience, working for a competing firm, and when the Q&A opened, she raised her hand and challenged every single one of his revenue projections, with data, with sources, and with a smile that made it genuinely impossible to be offended. He found her at the networking dinner that evening. "You destroyed my presentation," he said. "I improved it," she replied, picking up her glass. "You should send me a thank you card." He laughed. She laughed. By the end of the night, they had exchanged numbers, and by the following weekend, they had their first real date, a quiet corner of a rooftop restaurant. 2 hours had expanded into 5, neither of them willing to be the one to call it. Judith was sharp in a way that made you pay attention. She read everything, remembered everything, and had opinions you could offend without raising her voice. But it was the warmth underneath all of that which caught Daniel off guard, the way she would check in days after a conversation about something small he had mentioned in passing. A difficult call with his father, a headache that had lingered. She absorbed things, quietly, completely. By month 4, he had keys to her apartment. By month 8, they were talking about the future, vaguely at first, the way people do when they're afraid to want too much, and then more plainly, specific neighborhoods, rough timelines, names for children that felt embarrassing to say out loud, but which they kept returning to anyway, late at night, talking in the dark. He was going to propose. He had decided that. He just hadn't bought the ring yet. He should have bought the ring sooner. The first sign was a phone, not a message, not a name, just the phone itself, the way she started taking it everywhere. Into the bathroom, turned face down on the dinner table, switched to silent at moments it hadn't been silent before. It was a small thing, the kind of thing you could explain away if you wanted to, and for 3 weeks, Daniel explained it away. Work stress, a difficult client, a project with a tight deadline. Then came the Tuesday she was supposed to be at her sister's. He drove past the restaurant on his way home from the gym, not looking for anything, not suspicious of anything specific, just driving a route he had driven 100 times. And through the window he saw her, sitting across from a man he had never seen, her chin resting on her hand, leaning in the way she leaned when she was fully engaged, when the conversation mattered. The man's hand was on the table. Her hand was close to it. Daniel kept driving. He made it 2 blocks before he had to pull over. He sat in the car for 15 minutes. Then he drove home, made dinner, and when she came in an hour later smelling of a different neighborhood than her sister's, he handed her a glass of water and asked how her evening was. "Good," she said. "Quiet." "That's nice," he said. 2 days later, she left her laptop open on the kitchen counter. He walked past it to get his phone charger and a notification caught his eye, a message thread, previewed in the top corner of the screen. A name he didn't know. A line he couldn't unread. He read the whole thread. He shouldn't have, but he did. 4 months of messages. A name, Stanley. Hotels he had told him she was visiting her college roommate. A birthday weekend he had given her money for. Trips that had itineraries, inside jokes, photographs she had never shown him. And laid through all of it, conversations about Daniel himself, the kind that people have when they are quietly building a case of leaving. He plans everything 5 years ahead, she had written. I feel like I'm already living a life I haven't agreed to yet. Stanley had replied, so leave. She had written, I'm working up to it. Daniel took photos of every screen, quietly, methodically, without his hands shaking as much as he expected. Then he plugged in his charger, returned to the living room, and sat down with his book. When she came out of the shower 20 minutes later, he looked up and said, Did you eat? I made pasta. Yes, she said. Good, he said, and went back to reading. He thought about ending it every day for a week. He rehearsed a conversation the way you rehearse a speech, lying awake at 3 a.m, scripting her denial, scripting her confession, running every branch of the argument until each one ended the same way, with wreckage, with a version of himself he didn't want to become, bitter, reactive, the man who got loud and proved nothing and lost everything anyway. He sat with the anger, let it arrive and move through him instead of pushing it down. There were evenings he drove home and sat in his parked car for 20 minutes before going inside, because he didn't trust himself to look at her the way he used to look at her without something shifting in his face. He made it work. Every dinner, every quiet evening on the couch, every good night. He performed the version of himself she thought she was looking at, and the strange thing was that performing it made him feel more powerful, not less, because he knew something she didn't. And knowledge, when you're patient enough to hold it, is not a burden. It is an advantage. He called his brother James on a Thursday night and sat in his car in the parking garage at work to do it. He told him everything, flat and factual, the way you report a car accident. James was quiet for the entire story. Then, what do you want to do? Every version where I confront her, I lose something, Daniel said. I either forgive her and nothing changes, or I leave looking like I'm the one reacting, and she gets to frame it however she wants. Either way, she controls the narrative. And the other option, she's been choosing this for 4 months, Daniel said. This isn't a mistake she's trying to stop making. This is a direction she has been moving in deliberately towards someone else. So maybe I stop standing in front of it and let her arrive where she's going. James was quiet for a long moment. You're going to wait. I'm going to wait, Daniel said. And when she lands, I'm going to make sure the landing is honest. It wasn't a cold decision. It wasn't cruelty. It was just a clear-eyed recognition that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is remove yourself from someone's story and let them finish writing it alone, without you softening the consequences, without you catching them on the way down. She ended it on a Sunday morning 6 weeks later. She sat across from him at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around her coffee cup and delivered the words carefully, the way people deliver words they've been carrying for a while. Disconnected, needs space, cares about him, not in love with him, hopes they can remain close. Okay, Daniel said. She paused. Okay. I'm not going to make this harder than it needs to be, he said. He kept his voice level, kept his face open. He gave her nothing to push against. The relief on her face was the most honest expression he had seen from her in months. He moved out within the week. And over the following months, as Judith introduced Stanley to their social circle and the relationship escalated with a speed that made even her closest friends uncomfortable, Daniel remained present. He came to brunches. He was gracious. He asked Stanley about his work with the kind of interest that reads as genuine from the outside. And slowly, steadily, he was rewarded with a title every wrong person secretly desires, the mature one, the bigger person. When the engagement was announced, 3 of her friends texted Daniel privately, some version of, "Is this weird for you?" He replied to each of them the same way, "I want her to be happy." And he meant it, not in the generous version where you are genuinely fine, but in the precise version where you understand that some people's happiness will eventually become their own undoing, and there is nothing you need to add to accelerate that process. You just need to stay out of the way. He RSVP'd yes to the wedding, bought a gift from the registry, a set of good kitchen knives. He had a sense of humor about that, alone in his apartment. Stanley was charming in a way that required an audience. He told good stories, laughed at the right volume, picked up checks publicly enough that people noticed. But Daniel had watched him over 4 separate group gatherings, and what he saw in the margins was different from the performance in the center. The way his attention drifted when Judith was occupied. The way he looked at his phone with a particular care that was familiar. The way a server at the last dinner had lingered at his shoulder a beat longer than service required, and he had let her at the rehearsal dinner. Stanley found Daniel at the bar near the end of the night. "You're a better man than most," Stanley said, smiling with all his teeth. "Seriously, showing up to this thing, that takes character." Daniel looked at him for a moment. "I'm just here to see it through," he said, and clinked his glass against Stanley's. Stanley laughed, slapped him on the shoulder, and walked back toward the dance floor. Daniel watched him go. The ceremony was long and lit with afternoon light coming through the high windows of the church. Judith was radiant in the way brides are when they have committed fully to a decision, when the doubt has been quieted enough to make room for something that looks like joy. She cried at her vows. Stanley held her hands and said the words clearly, and the room exhaled with a particular tenderness of people who believe in the story they are watching. Daniel sat very still. He thought about the rooftop restaurant in Atlanta, the way she had laughed at the end of their first date, and said, "I didn't expect this." He thought about the kitchen, late at night, talking about names they would never use. He let himself think about all of it, clearly and without flinching, and when it was done, he folded it away. Then he waited until the reception was 2 hours old, until the speeches had settled and the dancing had started, and the room had the looseness of people who had stopped watching each other carefully. He took his phone out of his jacket pocket. The folder he had kept for 6 months was organized, timestamps, screenshots, a hotel receipt that matched exactly a weekend she had told him she was at her grandmother's. He did not send it to Judith. She already knew who she was. He sent it to Stanley, a single compressed file, one message. "You deserve to make an informed choice. I hope you use this well." He turned his phone face down on the table, finished his drink, stood up, buttoned his jacket, said goodbye to her parents, who hugged him and said he was a wonderful young man, shook hands with 2 uncles, smiled at a bridesmaid who asked if he was leaving already. "Early flight," he said. He walked out into the night air and stood on the steps for a moment, not triumphant, not broken, just done. He never learned the specific shape of what happened after. He didn't want to. Fragments reached him over the following months the way news always does, through mutual friends who couldn't quite help themselves. Voices raised in the hotel. A honeymoon shortened by 2 days. Questions without answers. He listened without asking for more, nodded, and moved on. He transferred to his firm's Chicago office 2 months later. New city, 14th floor, windows facing east. He started waking up at 5:30. He took long runs along the lakefront before the city was fully awake, and slowly, over months he couldn't precisely account for, he stopped replaying the timeline, stopped doing the math on when exactly things had started to go wrong. He let the whole thing settle into the past the way sediment settles, not erased, just still, fixed in place. No longer moving through him. He met someone the following spring at a bookshop on a rainy Saturday. She had the same book he was reaching for, and when they both stopped and looked at each other, she said, "I was here first." He laughed and said, "I'll buy it for you." She said she didn't need him to do that. He said he knew, but he wanted to. They got coffee. They talked for 3 hours. He had loved Judith. That was real, and he kept it that way. Not revised, not poisoned, just true in the way that things are when they are over. But love that is built on performance is not love that can hold anything real. And she had been performing for a long time. He had given her room to arrive at the ending she had already chosen, and in doing so he had walked out of his story with everything that mattered still intact. Some betrayals don't need revenge. They just need distance. And distance, it turned out, was the best thing that ever happened to him.
Stories like this happen more often than people admit. If you want more real, raw, and emotional stories like this, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.